You know, I was looking at some production numbers for modern fighter jets the other day just to get a sense of scale. The F-22 Raptor. The U.S. built about 195 of them. The Eurofighter Typhoon, maybe 600 or so.
Small batches, high-tech, astronomical costs. It's a different world.
Exactly. So when I look at the files you sent over for today's discussion, the numbers just don't compute. My brain refuses to scale it. 33,000.
It is a number that stops you in your tracks, doesn't it?
It really does. We are talking about the Messerschmitt Bf 109, 33,000 airframes, the most produced fighter aircraft in the history of warfare.
And arguably the most significant, at least in the European theater.
But here is the thing that jumped out at me from the notes. Usually a weapon of war has a shelf life. It shows up, it dominates for 2 years, technology moves on, and it becomes obsolete. The Spitfire changed drastically, the Mustang showed up late, but this machine...
A design from 1934.
From 1934. Fought on the first day of the war, fought on the last day of the war. And then, and this is the part I'm struggling to wrap my head around, it kept flying in foreign air forces until the mid-1960s.
It is the definitive paradox of aviation history. You have this airframe that essentially spans the entire era of piston engine combat.
But it wasn't the same plane, was it?
Not at all. The 109 that starts the story and the 109 that ends it, well, they're almost two different species sharing the same DNA.
That's the paradox you mentioned in the research.
Precisely. Imagine a 1930s sports car light, angular, nimble, that's the 1934 design. By 1945, they had taken that same chassis and turned it into a muscle car on steroids.
So it got heavier.
Oh, much heavier. Bulging, packed with cannons, barely able to stay on the road because the engine was so powerful. They pushed the engineering to the absolute breaking point.
So today, we're going to tear this plane apart. We're going to look at that evolution. We need to talk about the engineering philosophy, which was incredibly radical for the time.
And the feud. We cannot forget the feud.
The personal hatred that almost killed the plane before it was even built. And we have to go to the dark places, too. We need to discuss the industrial reality of how you build 33,000 airplanes while your country is being bombed to rubble.
It is not a clean story. It's an engineering icon, yes. But it's also an instrument of a very dark regime.
If you are enjoying this video, please watch it until the end. This greatly helps the channel and encourages us to continue our work. So let's rewind. Take me back to 1934. The Nazis have just taken power. They are secretly rearming. What is the state of the art in aviation?
Well, in 1934, if you looked up at the sky, you saw biplanes.
So fabric, wood, wire.
Exactly. Open cockpits, the wind in your face. That was aviation. But the Reich Aviation Ministry, the RLM, knew that wasn't the future.
Yeah.
They issued a requirement for a modern fighter. And the specs they laid out were, well, they were aggressive.
Aggressive how? What were they?
They wanted a top speed of 400 kilometers per hour. They wanted it to climb to 6,000 meters in 17 minutes. And they wanted a flight duration of 90 minutes.
Okay, so that's not a dogfighter for turning and burning. That sounds like a high-speed interceptor.
That's exactly what they wanted. Get up fast, hit the bombers, get down.
So they put out the call. Now, I assume Willy Messerschmitt is the first guy they call. I mean, the name is synonymous with German aviation.
You would think so.
Yeah.
But in 1934, Willy Messerschmitt was persona non grata. He was the underdog. In fact, he wasn't even supposed to be invited to the competition.
Why not? Was he considered incompetent?
Worse.
Yeah.
He was considered dangerous. And this is where the human element dictates history. There was a man named Erhard Milch. He was the state secretary for aviation, essentially the boss of the Luftwaffe procurement.
Okay.
And he hated Willy Messerschmitt with a passion that is hard to describe.
This wasn't just a professional disagreement, though.
No. This was blood. A few years prior, Messerschmitt had designed a transport plane, the M-20B. Lufthansa, the German airline, bought them. But they had a flaw. There were crashes. And in one of those crashes, a very close personal friend of Erhard Milch was killed.
Wow. Okay, so Milch blames Messerschmitt personally.
He accused him of criminal negligence. He publicly stated he would never, ever buy a Messerschmitt aircraft for the German military. He effectively bankrupted Messerschmitt's company, the Bayerische Flugzeugwerk, or BFW.
So when this big fighter competition came up...
Messerschmitt was on the outside looking in. The favorite was Heinkel.
Heinkel, they built the bombers later on.
Right, and Heinkel proposed the He-112. And if you look at the He-112, it's a beautiful plane. But it was safe. It had a wide landing gear, an open cockpit option, big curved wings.
It looked familiar to pilots of the era.
It looked like what a World War I pilot thought a modern plane should look like. It was robust.
And Messerschmitt. Being the underdog, did he try to play it safe too, to make something conventional?
He went the complete opposite direction. He knew he had no political capital. The only way he could win was if his plane was so radically superior that Milch couldn't ignore it. So he embraced a principle called lightweight construction.
Lightweight sounds great for a race car, but for a warplane, doesn't lightweight just mean fragile? You're getting shot at, after all.
And that was the criticism. But Messerschmitt's philosophy wasn't just about being light. It was about the power-to-weight ratio. He wanted the smallest possible airframe wrapped around the biggest possible engine.
Squeeze everything down.
Exactly. And the way he achieved this structure was genius. It's a concept called the firewall bracket.
Break that down for me. I'm looking at the diagram here. It looks like a single massive piece of metal.
That's it. In a traditional plane, the wings attach to the fuselage, the engine attaches to the front, the landing gear attaches to the wings. The stress is distributed all over the place. Messerschmitt said no.
What did he do instead?
He created one massive forged steel bracket at the firewall. That's the plate separating the pilot from the engine.
Okay.
And everything attached to that one bracket. The engine mounts bolted to the front of it, the wing roots bolted to the sides of it, and this is crucial, the landing gear pivot points were also on that same bracket.
So it's like a central spine for the whole aircraft.
It's a backpack frame. You carry everything on that one strong point. This meant the rest of the plane, the tail, the skin could be incredibly light. It was a semi-monocoque design, flush rivets, stressed metal skin. Compared to the Heinkel, which was built like a bridge, the Messerschmitt was built like a hollow needle.
But there's a funny footnote about the prototype flight in 1935. The V1 prototype.
Oh, the irony. So Messerschmitt builds this symbol of German superiority. It rolls onto the tarmac. But the German engine industry wasn't ready. The Jumo 210 engines weren't finished.
So what did they use to get it in the air?
A Rolls-Royce Kestrel V.
You're kidding me? A British engine?
The first flight of the Bf 109 was powered by a British engine, the very people it would spend the next 6 years trying to kill.
That is incredible, and probably something the propaganda ministry didn't advertise.
Definitely not. But even when they got the German engine sorted, the pilots, they hated it.
Why? If it was fast, wouldn't they love it?
It was too modern. First, the cockpit was fully enclosed. You have to remember, these pilots relied on the wind on their cheeks to sense the slip of the plane. They felt trapped in this little glass box.
Claustrophobic.
Very. It's like switching from a motorcycle to a submarine.
And then there were the wings.
The wings were tiny. It had a very high wing loading. Now, small wings mean less drag, so you go fast. But it also means you generate less lift at low speeds.
Which makes landing absolutely terrifying.
Terrifying. A very high stall speed. If you slow down too much, the plane would just drop out of the sky. But Messerschmitt had a trick up his sleeve. The automatic leading-edge slats.
I saw this in the notes. Automatic in 1935. Was there a computer involved?
Pure aerodynamics.
Yeah.
No hydraulics, no electrics. Imagine a movable strip on the front edge of the wing. It was held in place by springs.
Okay.
When the plane was flying fast, the air pressure pushed the slat flush against the wing, making it streamlined. But as you slow down or pull a high G turn, the angle of the wing changes. The angle of attack increases. The air pressure on the nose of the wing drops. Suddenly, the force of the spring overcomes the air pressure, and the slat pushes out. Crunk.
It physically pops out on its own.
It pops out. This creates a slot that forces air from beneath the wing to rush over the top, re-energizing the airflow and delaying the stall. It's like an invisible hand grabbing the air. It allowed this tiny winged plane to turn and fly slowly, just as well as a biplane.
But the pilots didn't trust it.
It scared them to death. You're in a dogfight, you're pulling hard, and suddenly, bang, one slat pops out. Maybe the other one sticks for a split second. The plane shudders violently. It took a long, long time for them to trust that the machine would catch them.
And we can't talk about the design flaws without talking about the landing gear. You mentioned it was attached to that central firewall bracket.
The Achilles heel. The single biggest flaw of the aircraft, from start to finish. Because the gear legs were attached to the fuselage, not the wings, they were very close together, a narrow track.
So it's inherently unstable on the ground.
Like trying to balance on a bicycle versus a tricycle. And to make it worse, the wheels were angled outward. If you touched down and one wheel grabbed the grass a little harder than the other, the plane would swerve violently.
You have a ground loop.
Physics would take over, the center of gravity would swing around, and the plane would spin on the ground. The gear leg would break, the wing would hit the ground. It's estimated that 5 to 10% of all 109s built were destroyed in takeoff and landing accidents.
Not in combat.
Not in combat. just trying to get up or get down. It killed countless novice pilots before they even saw an enemy. But despite the crashes, despite the hatred from Milch, the 109 was simply faster and cheaper to build than the Heinkel. It won the competition.
Before we get to the combat debut, I need to clear something up. I see it written as Bf 109 and Me 109. Even in books, it switches back and forth. Which one is actually right?
It is the pedant's favorite argument.
Yeah.
Technically, BF is the correct official designation for the airframe.
And BF stands for?
Bayerische Flugzeugwerke, Bavarian Aircraft Factory. That was the company name when the design was submitted.
But the company changed its name later.
Yes, in 1938, after Messerschmitt became a star, the company was renamed Messerschmitt AG. So later aircraft like the jet fighter, the Me-262, are officially Me.
So because the 109 started as a Bf, the German bureaucracy just kept it that way.
Exactly. But the Allies called it the Me-109. The pilots called it the Me-109. Even Messerschmitt's own internal memos sometimes use Me-109. So, honestly, both are acceptable. But if you want to be historically precise for the early war, it's Bf.
Got it. Okay, so the plane exists. It has a British engine, then a German engine. It has tiny wings and a landing gear that wants to kill you.
Yeah.
And now the world decides to go to war. But not WWII yet. We are talking about Spain.
The Spanish Civil War, 1937. This was the laboratory. Hitler sent the Condor Legion to support Franco's nationalists. It was a live-fire exercise, a way to test the new Wehrmacht equipment. And they sent the 109.
This wasn't just target practice, though. They were fighting real opposition.
Very real. The Republicans were supported by the Soviet Union. And the Soviets sent their best fighter, the Polikarpov I-16. This is important. The I-16 was a monoplane. It was fast. It was actually better than the German Heinkel IMI. 51 biplanes that were already there.
So the Germans were getting beaten at first.
They were getting slaughtered. Then the Bf 109 arrived, the B, C, and D variants. Suddenly, the Germans had the speed advantage. They could dictate the terms of every engagement. But the machine is only half the story. The 109 changed how pilots fought.
This brings us to Werner Mulders,
the father of modern air combat. Before Spain, pilots flew like they did in World War I. Tight formations, 3 planes in a V shape.
Wingtip to wingtip, practically.
Ideally, yes. But the problem is, if you were flying 2 feet from your leader's wing, what are you looking at?
You're looking at his wings so you don't crash into him. You're not looking for the enemy.
Exactly. Your situational awareness is 0. Mulders realized that with the speed of the 109, this was suicide. So he invented the finger 4. Right. Think of your hand. 4 fingers spread out. You split them into 2 pairs. Each pair is a rot. You have a leader and a wingman.
And the wingman's job isn't to go find his own fight.
His job is to cover the leader's tail. That's it. And they don't fly tight. They fly loose. Hundreds of meters apart. This way, both pilots can scan the sky.
It's a revolution in situational awareness.
A total revolution. It allowed the Germans to spot the enemy first. And because the 109 was fast and climbed like a rocket, they developed what we now call energy fighting.
Boom and zoom.
Precisely. They didn't get into turning dogfights with the more agile Russian planes. They would dive, fire a burst, and use their speed to zoom back up to altitude. Then they would repeat the process. While the enemy was twisting and turning, bleeding energy, the 109 was already back up high, picking its next shot.
And the Allies hadn't figured this out yet.
Not at all. When World War II actually started in 1939, the Polish, the French, the British, they were all still flying those tight V formations. The Luftwaffe, with their new tactics and their new planes, just tore them apart.
So fast forward to 1940. The fall of France is over. The Germans are looking across the channel at Britain. And the 109 gets a major upgrade. The Emil, the Bf 109E.
The Emil, this is the poster child. If you see a movie about the Battle of Britain, this is the plane. It has a squarer nose. And under that nose, the Daimler-Benz DD601 engine.
This engine is legendary. But purely from a technical standpoint, it had one massive advantage over the British Merlin engine in the Spitfire. And it wasn't horsepower.
No, it was the fuel delivery system. The British Merlin used a carburetor. It's basically a sophisticated bowl with a float in it that mixes fuel and air.
Like an old lawnmower.
A very fancy and powerful lawnmower, but yes, it fundamentally relied on gravity. Now imagine you are a Spitfire pilot. You have a 109 on your tail. You push the stick forward to dive away. That's a negative G maneuver. You float up in your straps.
And the fuel in the carburetor floats up too.
Exactly. It floats away from the intake. The engine starves of fuel. It coughs, sputters, and cuts out completely. For a few seconds, you're a glider.
Which is the last thing you want with a German on your tail.
Meanwhile, the German DB601 had direct fuel injection, mechanical pumps forcing fuel directly into the cylinders. Gravity didn't matter. The 109 pilot could just push the nose down and dive straight into hell. The engine would keep screaming the whole way.
So the Spitfire pilot has to perform a half roll, roll over upside down, then pull into a dive to keep positive Gs.
Which takes about 2 or 3 crucial seconds. In a dogfight, 2 seconds is a lifetime. That fuel injection saved countless German lives and doomed plenty of British ones.
The O'Meal also brought the heavy firepower. We aren't just talking machine guns anymore.
No. The Emil introduced the 20mm MG FF cannons in the wings. And this is where German chemistry comes in. They developed a special type of ammunition. The Menegischos.
The mine shell.
That's right. Standard aircraft bullets were solid lumps of lead or steel, maybe an incendiary tip. They punched holes. The Menegischos was different. They figured out how to draw the steel casing of the shell incredibly thin, like a soda can, but still strong enough to survive being fired.
Thinner walls mean more room inside for explosives.
Loads more room. They packed it with high-grade explosives. When a Menegischos hit a Spitfire wing, it didn't just punch a hole. It detonated inside the structure. It would blow panels off. It severed control cables. 2 or 3 hits could literally dismantle a fighter in the air.
So you have the engine with fuel injection, you have these devastating cannons. On paper, the 109E looks superior to the Spitfire Mark I.
It's the classic debate, 109 versus Spitfire. The reality is, they were remarkably evenly matched, but they fought differently. The 109 climbed faster. It dove faster.
But the Spitfire had the edge in a turn.
A huge edge. Its elliptical wing was a masterpiece. If a 109 pilot was foolish enough to try to turn with a Spitfire, he died. If a Spitfire pilot tried to climb after a 109, he died. It was all about fighting to your plane's strengths.
But the 109 had a flaw, a strategic flaw that had nothing to do with aerodynamics or firepower.
The range. It all comes back to that original design philosophy. Remember, in 1934, the RLM wanted an interceptor, a short-range defense fighter. It only carried about 400 liters of fuel internally.
Which is fine if you are defending Berlin, not so fine if you are attacking London from bases in France.
It was a disaster. By the time they took off, formed up, crossed the channel, and got to London, they had maybe 10 minutes of fuel.
10 minutes of fighting time.
That's it. And that's not 10 minutes of gentle cruising. That's 10 minutes at combat throttle. The red low-fuel light on the dashboard would flicker on almost as soon as the fight started.
That has to be psychologically draining for the pilots.
It was crippling. You're watching your fuel gauge just as much as you're watching your tail. German pilots had to break off fights. They were winning because they knew if they stayed another 60 seconds, they'd be swimming home.
Yeah.
They couldn't pursue. They couldn't effectively protect the bombers. That lack of range likely saved the RAF.
They tried to fix it with drop tanks later, right? The E4 and E7 variants.
They did. They introduced racks for external fuel tanks. But for the critical summer of 1940, during the height of the battle, they were rare. It was a logistical failure that had massive strategic consequences.
So the Battle of Britain ends. Germany fails to achieve air superiority. But the war is just getting started, and Messerschmitt goes back to the drawing board. This leads us to what many pilots consider the absolute peak of the design, the Friedrich.
The Bf 109F. If the Emil was a brawler, the Friedrich was a surgeon's scalpel. They introduced it in late 1940, early 1941. They looked at the Emil and said, "It's too boxy. It's too draggy."
So they smoothed it out.
Completely. They redesigned the engine cowling to flow perfectly into a new, rounded propeller spinner. They rounded off the wingtips, which had been square on the Emil. They even removed the bracing struts on the horizontal tail, those little bars that held the tailplane up.
All for clean aerodynamics, less drag, more speed.
Much less drag. It was faster and maneuvered beautifully. But as always with the 109, there was a fight. This time it was about the guns.
What was the controversy?
They took the cannons out of the wings.
Wait, they reduced the firepower after we just talked about how effective it was?
They concentrated it. The Friedrich had 2 machine guns on the nose and one 20mm cannon firing through the propeller hub out the center of the spinner.
What was the logic behind that?
Messerschmitt argued that guns in the wings act like weights on the end of a dumbbell. They create inertia and make the plane roll slower. He wanted to maximize agility.
That makes sense from an engineering perspective, but pilots usually want as much lead in the air as possible.
Exactly. And this split the Luftwaffe's top aces right down the middle. Adolf Galland, the famous ace with the cigar, he hated it. He wanted a shotgun spread of fire. He famously told Messerschmitt, "You are castrating my fighter."
That is a strong piece of feedback.
But on the other side, you had Werner Mulders, the tactician we talked about earlier. He loves it. He said, if you're a good shot, one cannon in the center is all you need. It's a marksman's weapon. There's no convergence to worry about. The bullets go exactly where you point the nose of the plane.
And in terms of performance, how did the Friedrichs stack up?
It was dominant. For a time, it was superior to the Spitfire Mark V, which is the RAF's main fighter. And when they took it to Russia for Operation Barbarossa in 1941, it was an absolute slaughter. It was the perfect dogfighter.
Hmm.
But the war didn't stay still.
The Allies got better. The arms race continued.
The Spitfire Mark IX appeared, which was a huge leap forward. The Americans arrived with thousands of heavy bombers. The Russians started building much better planes like the Yak-3. The surgeon's scalpel wasn't enough anymore. They needed a sledgehammer.
Enter the Gustav, the Bf-109G.
The Gustav, the workhorse. This is the version most people saw. Over a third of all 33,000 109s built were Gustavs. And this is where the engineering purity of the Friedrich starts to die.
Because they needed more power to carry more weight.
Exactly. They installed the new Daimler-Benz DB605 engine. It eventually produced nearly 1,500 horsepower, but it was heavier. And they needed bigger guns to shoot down four-engine bombers like the B-17.
I've seen pictures of the Gustav. It looks bumpy, lumpy almost.
They called it Die Buell, the bulge. To fit the new, larger 13mm MG-131 machine guns over the engine, they had to hammer out big blisters on the cowling. To fit the larger wheels needed to handle the heavier weight, they put blisters on the top of the wings.
So they were ruining that perfect, sleek airflow they had just achieved with the Friedrich.
They are. The Gustav was fast in a straight line, but it was heavy. Pilots said it handled like a truck compared to the Friedrich. It became less of a dogfighter and more of a pure interceptor. The compromise.
But it packed a punch. This is where we see the Mk-108 cannon, the sledgehammer.
The 30mm Mk-108, this is a terrifying weapon. It fired a minigun the size of a beer can. But the barrel was short. It was a low-velocity weapon.
So you couldn't snipe with it from a long way out?
No. The trajectory was like lobbing a pumpkin. You had to get very close to a bomber. But if you hit, one shell could blow the tail off a fighter. 3 or 4 could bring down a B-17 Flying Fortress.
And they kept adding more guns, right? I've seen them with cannon pods under the wings.
The Risets kits. These were field modification kits. You could strap a gondola with a 20mm cannon under each wing.
So now you have 3 cannons and 2 machine guns.
Great for killing bombers.
Yeah.
But it was absolute suicide for dogfighting. Those pods killed your speed and, more importantly, your roll rate. So the 109 pilots were in a terrible trap.
How so?
If they loaded up with cannons to kill the bombers, the American P-51 Mustang escorts would eat them alive. If they stripped the plane down to fight the Mustangs, they didn't have the firepower to stop the bombers from reaching their targets.
And to try and keep up with the Mustangs, they used that boost system, MW-50.
Methanol Water 50. It's a chemical injection system, a form of anti-detonant injection.
How does that work? Is it like nitrous in a drag racer?
Sort of, yeah. You inject this 50-50 mixture into the supercharger intake. As it evaporates, it cools the compressed air charge dramatically. Colder air is denser, which means you get more oxygen into the cylinders. This allowed them to run much higher boost pressures without the engine detonating or knocking.
So it's a temporary turbo boost, emergency power.
Exactly. You could run it for maybe 10 minutes at a time. It gave the Gustav the burst of speed it needed to catch a Mustang, or more likely, run away from one. But the engine life was measured in hours at that point. They were pushing the technology to its absolute limit.
And then, just when you think the design is completely tapped out, we get the final chapter, the Kurfürst, the K4.
Late 1944, Germany is collapsing, factories are being bombed daily, but they managed to streamline the 109 one last time. The K4 was the fastest 109 ever built, over 700 kilometers per hour.
That's approaching early jet speeds?
It could climb faster than a P-51. Technically, on paper, it was a match for anything the Allies had in the air.
But on paper doesn't win wars, especially in 1944.
No. By late 1944, the Luftwaffe had no fuel. And worse, they had no experienced pilots. You had teenagers with maybe 10 or 20 hours of flight time jumping into a K4. This was a 2,000 horsepower monster that was nearly impossible to land safely.
And the build quality must have been suffering.
Atrocious. They were using wood for the tail sections because they ran out of aluminum. The glue would sometimes fail in flight. It was a last-ditch desperation weapon.
Before we move to the operational history in more detail, I want to touch on the weird variants. Because they didn't just build fighters, they tried to put this airframe on an aircraft carrier.
The Bess 109T for Traeger, which means carrier. Germany was building an aircraft carrier, the Graf Zeppelin.
I had no idea Germany even had a carrier program.
They built the hull. It never sailed operationally, but the program was real, and they built the planes for it. The 109T had much longer wings to generate more lift at low speeds for carrier landings, and of course a tailhook.
But the carrier was canceled. What happened to the planes?
They sent them to Norway. The short takeoff ability was actually perfect for the tiny, windy airstrips in the fjords, so they found a use for them.
And what about this Willing? That means twin, right?
The BIS 109Z, this is pure Frankenstein stuff. They took 209 fuselages and welded them together with a new central wing section.
Like the American P-82 twin Mustang.
Exactly the same concept, but the Germans thought of it first. The pilot sat in the left fuselage. The right one was fared over and filled with extra fuel. It was meant to be a heavy destroyer or a fast bomber.
Did it ever fly?
The prototype was built, but an Allied bombing raid destroyed it in its hangar before it could ever take to the skies. It's one of the great what-ifs of the war.
Okay, let's talk operational history. The 109 has the highest kill counts of any fighter in history. We have pilots like Erich Hartmann with 352 victories, Gerhard Barkhorn with 301. These numbers seem impossible compared to Allied aces. An American ace like Richard Bong had 40 kills, and he was a legend. Why the huge disparity?
It's a combination of environment and policy. First, the Eastern Front, the Great Patriotic War.
A target-rich environment, as they say.
Unbelievably so. In 1941 and 1942, the Soviets were flying largely obsolete planes, often without radios. Their pilot training was rushed and rudimentary. The German expert and their top aces were, frankly, shooting fish in a barrel.
But the policy was different, too. Their aces stayed in combat.
That's the key difference. In the US or the UK, if you survived a tour of duty, say 50 missions, you were a hero. They sent you home to sell war bonds and, more importantly, to train the new guys. Your invaluable combat knowledge was recycled back into the system.
And in Germany?
You flew until you won the war, or until you died. There was no rotation. Erich Hartmann flew 1,400 combat missions. He was shot down 16 times. He just kept coming back. So the scores accumulated over years of constant combat, but that knowledge often died with the pilots.
But it wasn't just shooting turkeys on the Eastern Front. In North Africa, you had Hans-Joachim Marseille. He was fighting experienced British, Australian, and South African pilots in Spitfires and Hurricanes, and he still scored 158 victories.
Marseille is the virtuoso, the star of Africa. He flew the 109F, the pure dogfighter. He didn't just spray and pray, he mastered the art of deflection shooting.
Can you explain that for the listener?
Most pilots would try to get directly behind an enemy and shoot straight. Marseille would calculate where the enemy was going to be. He would aim at empty space ahead of the turning fighter. He would throttle back, drop his combat flaps to turn tighter than the physics manual said he could, and snipe the pilot with an incredibly short burst of cannon fire. He supposedly shot down 17 Allied aircraft in a single day.
That is just absurd.
He proved that the 109, in the hands of a true genius, was perhaps the deadliest fighter of its time.
And the plane wasn't just used by Germany. It was exported all over. Finland stands out to me.
The Finnish experience is legendary. They called it the Mersu. They were fighting for their national survival against the Soviet Union. They took the 109G, the heavy, bumpy one, and they used it with cold, deadly precision.
What were their stats like?
They achieved a kill ratio of 25-1. For every single Mersu they lost in combat, they shot down 25 Soviet planes. Their top ace, Ilmari Udalainen, scored 94 victories. He famously never took a single bullet hole in his own plane during his entire career.
And they kept them flying for a long time after the war.
Until 1954. Long after the jet age had started, the Finns were still flying their piston-engine 109s.
And then there's Switzerland. They were neutral, but they bought 109s.
And this is a wild footnote in history. In 1940, during the invasion of France, German bombers would frequently cut corners through Swiss airspace. The Swiss Air Force, flying German-built Bf 109s, would intercept them.
So you have 109 shooting down German Heinkel bombers.
That's right. The Luftwaffe was furious. Hermann Goering called it a disgrace. They actually threatened to invade Switzerland over it.
Yeah.
The Swiss had to paint big red and white neutrality stripes on their wings to stop the constant confusion.
We have discussed the engineering triumph and the combat record, but we have to pivot now. We need to talk about how these machines were actually built, especially later in the war.
This is essential. We cannot fetishize the machine and ignore its origin. By 1943, the Allied bombing campaign was systematically dismantling German industry. The massive raid on the Messerschmitt factory at Regensburg in August 1943 was a disaster for production.
So they decided to disperse the factories.
Dispersal is the polite word. What they actually did was move production underground into forests and into the concentration camp system. This was a coordinated effort between Messerschmitt managers and the SS.
We are talking about camps like Flossenburg, Mauthausen, and Gusen.
Yes. Gusen II was hell on earth. It was a subcamp of Mauthausen, specifically set up for arms production. They forced prisoners to dig tunnels into mountains to create bomb-proof factories. Then they set up assembly lines for the 109 inside those tunnels.
The statistics are horrifying. I read that by mid-1944, as much as 35% of all 109 production originated from these camps.
That's correct. The fuselage sections, the wings, they were built by starving slave laborers working 12-hour shifts with no safety equipment. The mortality rate at Gusen was catastrophic. The average life expectancy of a prisoner sent there was measured in mere months.
And there was the Reimahg plant as well.
At Walpersburg, they hollowed out an entire mountain. They built a complete multi-level factory inside for the Me-262 jet and the 109. Thousands died constructing it.
It's a chilling contrast. We look at the 109 as this sleek, beautiful piece of engineering. But if you scratch the paint on a late war model, the metal underneath was likely riveted by someone being worked to death.
It strips away any romance of the Knights of the Air. It grounds the aircraft in the brutal reality of the Nazi regime. It was a weapon of war forged in human suffering.
And yet the story doesn't end in 1945. The war ends. The factories are bombed out, but the 109 keeps flying. And the most ironic chapter of its entire existence happens in Czechoslovakia.
This is one of those twists of history that feels like fiction. After the war, the Avia factory in Prague had all the tooling, the molds and jigs to build Bevo 109s. They wanted to build up their own air force. But there was a problem.
They didn't have any engines.
The warehouse with the high-performance Daimler-Benz DB605 engines had been destroyed in a bombing raid. But they had another warehouse full of Junkers Jumo 211 engines.
The bomber engine from the Heinkel 111.
The very same. It was heavy, it was slow revving, it was designed to pull a bus, not push a sports car.
So they stuck a bomber engine into a 109 airframe.
They did. They called it the Avia S199. The pilots, however, called it the Mezek,
Which means mule.
because it was stubborn and it kicked like one. The Jumo engine was so heavy it completely messed up the center of gravity. But the real killer was the torque. To handle the engine's power, they had to use a massive, paddle-bladed propeller.
Can you explain the torque issue on takeoff?
Sure. So when a propeller spins one way, Newton's third law says the plane wants to roll the other way. With the S199, that force was violent and uncontrollable. As soon as you throttled up for takeoff, the left wing would try to dig into the ground.
So the pilot has to fight it constantly.
You had to stand on the right rudder pedal with all your strengths just to keep the plane going straight. If you relaxed for a split second, it would flip over and kill you. It was slower than the German 109, it climbed worse, and the canopy mechanism was faulty, so sometimes you couldn't even bail out.
It sounds like an absolute death trap.
It was. But, and here is the supreme irony of the entire story, in 1948, the new state of Israel was declared. 5 Arab armies immediately invaded. Israel had no air force. No country in the world would sell them modern weapons, except for Czechoslovakia.
So the first fighter aircraft of the new Jewish state was a Nazi-designed Messerschmitt.
Yes, the Avia S199 Mule. Jewish pilots, some of whom were Americans and Brits who had flown Mustangs and Spitfires and WWII, and some who were actually Holocaust survivors, climbed into these flawed, dangerous cockpits.
That must have been an incredibly surreal experience.
Lou, one of the first pilots, said it was the worst plane he ever flew. He said it tried to kill you on takeoff and it tried to kill you on landing, but it had cannons.
And they flew them in combat against Egyptian Spitfires.
The Battle of Britain Redux, but in the deserts of the Middle East with the sides completely flipped. The Nazis' primary fighter, flown by Jewish pilots, defending the Jewish people against British-built Spitfires. History has a very dark sense of humor.
And there was one more post-war variant, the movie star of the family.
The Hispano Aviation HA-1112 Buchon. Spain had been building 109s under license during the war. After the war, they kept building the airframes, but like the Czechs, they couldn't get German engines.
So they went shopping for a new engine.
And they bought British Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, the exact same engine that powered the Spitfire and the Mustang.
We've come full circle. The very first prototype had a Rolls-Royce, and the very last operational version had a Rolls-Royce.
The Buchon served in the Spanish Air Force until 1965, but it looks different. The Merlin engine required a big radiator intake under the nose, so the Buchon doesn't have that sleek shark shape of the German models. It looks like it has a double chin.
Hence the nickname.
Exactly. Buchon is a type of pigeon known for its large, puffed-out crop or throat.
And these are the planes we see in the movies.
Yes. If you watch the 1969 film Battle of Britain, almost all those German 109s you see are actually Spanish Buchons with Merlin engines. They were the only ones still flying in large enough numbers to make a movie with.
So let's unpack this. What does it all mean? When we look back at the Bf 109, what is the final takeaway?
I think it's a testament to the fundamental soundness of the original concept. A 1934 design that remained a credible threat in 1945 and served in some form until the mid-1960s. That is exceptionally rare in the history of aviation. It was a true pilot's airplane, demanding, unforgiving on the ground, but in the right hands, absolutely lethal in the air.
And it's a symbol of the terrifying scale of industrial warfare. 33,000 machines, the destruction they wrought, and the suffering caused to build them. It's a very complex legacy.
It is. It's an engineering icon and an instrument of war in the truest sense. You can admire the aerodynamics while simultaneously condemning the purpose for which it was built.
Well, that brings us to the end of our look at the Messerschmitt Bf 109. From the drawing boards of Bavaria to the skies over London, the frozen steppes of Russia, and the deserts of Israel. It's been quite a journey.
A fascinating machine with a very heavy history.
If viewers enjoyed the video, they can subscribe to the channel, activate the notification bell to be notified about new videos, click the like button, and share the video with their colleagues, as this helps us maintain the channel. Thank you.